Welcome to Daily Grace. We're glad you're with us today. Whether you're watching it at noon when we're live or whether you're helping yourself fall asleep later tonight.
Aw, why do you say that when I'm here?
Dulcet sounds of Ben's voice. We're going to have a great time today talking about worldview and specifically biblical worldview. Ben, what is a worldview? Like before we do anything else, we got to know what we're talking about.
Do you want the really fancy, 10-line version or just the way that I can remember it?
Yeah, that one.
Okay, I mean, at some really just base value, a worldview is the way you see the world. I love the glasses or the lens that when you go out, when you see people, when you see the earth, the creation, everything that's around us, it's the way that you interpret that, the way that you see that, the way that you understand those things. And then it's also what you do with them. One of the most helpful ways that I've ever found was kind of...
I love this. You just start them going, and this is wonderful.
This is why I put you right to sleep.
No, this is great, though. So first of all, the way you see the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's like the base level. What a worldview is putting on a set of glasses. Is everyone wearing the glasses?
Well, we're all wearing different glasses at times.
We're all wearing different glasses, yeah. And where do they come from? Like, what affects what power I have in my lenses or what shade I have in my lenses? Where does this all come from?
And it comes from a lot of different places, right? It's just, the things that we've studied at a young age, maybe even the schools that we've gone to or the schools of thought that we hold to, or for where we're at today, just opening the Bible, that gives us one. And what I wanted to, I think, a lot of times it's just we can very quickly find that in our worldviews, we have a lot of presuppositions, experiences, and a lot of our influences impact where we're getting the view that we have, the glasses that we put on.
Exactly. So our lenses come from the experiences we've had or the people we've read or the people we've talked to
Absolutely.
and have formed us, our mentors, and how we interpret the world, like the presuppositions. Like that's a great word, which we may not even know we have, but just, this happened because that happens. And that's going on in the background of our minds. We don't even know it's there, but that's affecting the glasses through which we're seeing the world.
I think an easy example of that is just, for all of us who have been married, like, when you try to run the house together, like when you're trying to do that relationship for the first time, I thought everybody knew the person who cooks doesn't do the dishes.
Right. Because that's just part of your role. And
I learned that's not always true.
Because you're doing the dishes now and cooking.
Nah, she does them both now. She's great.
Does the toilet paper go over the roll or under the roll? I mean, not really.
There's the right way or the wrong way.
Yeah, there's the right way. Yeah. So also, talking about like the lenses is what it is, kind of how it comes into each of our lives, like what it is. But what does it encompass? Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about a worldview at its nub? Like, if you had to boil it down to three things.
Yeah, right. For me, one of the most helpful things was just trying to, since a worldview is your perspective on the world, and there is a reality there, that it's helped me trying to see it from my own point of view of really three things of where I've come from, where I'm at, and then where I'm going. So where I've come from, where I'm at now, and where I'm going, or who I used to be, who I am now, and then who I will be. And what I love about this is, to kind of jump ahead, is when we see it from this perspective, if you have any bit of a biblical worldview at all, we're going to see that God has his hand and his signature on all of this.
All those things.
And he's influenced all of them. And really, I think these three questions, or these three little places of who I was or where I came from, who or where I am now, and who I will be or where I will be in the future, really begin to help us give a bit of a framework, a biblical framework of understanding a biblical worldview.
And it's not just personally where I've come from, where I am right now, where I'm going, but collectively, like my worldview will say where we as humanity or the world came from, what it's about
Absolutely.
right now, and where it's going. Like every worldview is going to account not just for our own selves, but also for the whole journey of humanity or the whole journey of the universe. That's part of why it's a worldview and not just a person view. It's what I understand reality to be.
Yeah.
And I like the way you say that in terms of origins, in terms of purpose right now, and in terms of destiny.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that has to be worldview.
And what's so interesting is, so many of us answered these questions differently, and we can come to different conclusions. Of some of us don't just believe in the same way of where we came from, and we don't all believe that we have the same purpose right now, and we for sure don't always believe that we have the same destination or eternity or really just a destination. And so, I think what we wanted,
So do it.
I think what we were kind of talking about was what are some of the examples that we have today
Of
that
different-
of different worldviews. And so one of the first ones that I was very influenced by as a biology major in college, and just I was so super influenced
Ben
by.
was pre-med, and so all our medical questions we ask him in the office. We always go to Ben because he's pre-med. He knows it all.
Absolutely, and you should. I'm.
So in your biology, not only that, you grew up in an unchurched background, really.
Yeah.
So
So one of the ones that was really influential, just that influenced me a lot, was the worldview of evolutionism. So and to kind of walk you through, I mean, from an origin of that, I love the way that my biology professor, my sophomore year, explained it to me, that we were just simply specialized fish.
Specialized fish.
Yeah, and he was like, "I'll take the whole semester to prove that to you." And anyways,
I
and
feel
so,
like I'm a happy monkey.
oh,
You could be a specialized fish,
I don't
but
think
I'm a
anyone's
happy
going to
monkey.
argue against that. And so that really, from our origin, we're nothing. We're no different than the rest of the animals. We just happen to be a little bit more specialized. And so that influences, because of our origin, where we are today, our own purposes of, what are we called to do today? Because of our origins, what should we do today? And do we have any morals that are dependent on that, or any of the other things that come from that? And if we are just simply animals and we are just fish, then shouldn't we just act like animals or specialized fish? Or what do we do to that? And then where are we going to go? What's our destination? Is influenced by our worldview, that if we are just animals and fish, and that we have to act like animals and fish, then we're going to have the same destination as specialized fish and animals, and that's what our worldview, a consistent worldview, will say. But there's so many more, aren't there?
Well, and actually, before talking about a biblical, so evolutionism, there's one. A couple others. Let's just do sort of a speed round. A lot of our friends may be Mormon, or maybe in Eastern North Carolina, there's a lot of Mormonism, and Mormons are. We love talking to our neighbors. But I will say this: their worldview, though they use a lot of language that overlaps with Christianity in terms of Jesus and the cross and stuff like that, the worldview is 100% opposed to Christianity of Mormonism. And here's why, in two simple things. For Mormons, they believe that the earth is eternal and gods are created. But Christianity, God is eternal and the earth is created. So right there you see it's
so
absolutely
two
different stories.
Like to see that, yeah.
But just as a simple thing. What else? What else can we talk about?
I mean, there's also other religions that we see.
That's true.
I mean, Islam, and even Hinduism as well.
Yep.
Just
all different worldviews.
You see them all over. The ways that we see from kind of a cyclical. I remember we kind of talked about this. Kind of a view of history and a view of just time, of being much more cyclical
with Hinduism.
And what we'll see is, like, with a biblical worldview, it's very linear. But what else?
Well, one more maybe, and then moving into what are the elements of a biblical worldview. I mean, right now, today, in our conversation as a nation and in the West, we are seeing in our conversation a resurgence of popular Marxism. And this is something, like, I love history and I love studying and I love political science and theory and stuff like that. And it's interesting, and it surprised me how fast this has ramped up in terms of several political leaders, several social activists. And what we're watching today is a resurgence of something that I remember in college when the Berlin Wall fell and kind of that era of history was over. Well, everything old is new again. And what is a Marxist worldview? So, generalization alert. I think you could say it in two things. Number one is that the essence of humanity is power. Everything is a class struggle, or oppressor oppressed. And there's a hint of reality there because, yeah, there's always been oppression, and we call it sin, and so on and so forth. But everything they see about humanity as a Marxist is in terms of the power dynamic. And that's why it's the eternal revolution, it's the class struggle and so forth back in Lenin's day. The other thing about Marxism is that the individual doesn't matter, the collective is everything. The collective is everything. Your group identity or your class, 100 years ago it was all about class, today it's all about group identity. But these two things, power is everything and collective identity is everything. These are hallmarks of a Marxist worldview, which is fascinating that it's back on the scene, and maybe not so fascinating if you've sort of been in certain circles, but popularly, we're seeing this all over the place. It's not a Christian worldview. Fascinating. It's not a Christian worldview.
And I think what's terrifying about it, and it's true of Marxism, and it's true of the other ones that we mentioned, is they're shadows of a reality.
Yeah, echoes.
Yeah, and I love, the echoes. Jonathan Edwards would often say shadows and just echo. Like, I love, either way. Seems to be something there. And even like, as Christians, we can hear a little bit of truth in it. And we're like, oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah. Yeah, because we do want to care for our neighbors, and Marx is saying, well, no one person matters. It's the collective whole. It's the good of well, okay, the echo I get, but the outplaying is a disaster.
Absolutely.
Is a disaster.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about a biblical worldview, and let's do it pretty quickly, because you could spend 10 years talking about a biblical worldview. But a few weeks ago at church on the July 5th Sunday, and we talked about what is a Christian's role in society and from Proverbs and stuff. And in that sermon, I mentioned 5 points of a Christian worldview. What makes a biblical worldview or a Judeo-Christian ethic on the world? And let me just lay these out again, and then we'll talk about, well, how do we cultivate it? How do we engage folks who don't have that, and so on and so forth. A little application. Oh. But just for now, what is it again that demarks a Christian worldview from the rest of the worldview? Marxism or evolutionism or Mormonism or Islam, Hinduism, all these other things, secularism. A creator creates with order and goodness and laws. That's one thing. A creator creates, and there's order, goodness, and laws in the creation. All humanity, all humans, a second thing, all humans have inherent dignity. This is where we get all our language of human rights. Everything in the West in the last 500 years about human rights has come from Christianity. This is the worldview that says every individual has inherent rights, dignity, worth. And that comes straight out of Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, all the way to Revelation 22. Speaking of that, third point of a Christian worldview is that history has a goal. In other words, it's going somewhere. It's linear. Ben was talking in Hinduism and reincarnations and everything cyclical. It's not Christian. They're actually going somewhere. There are patterns and waves, but it's going somewhere. Fourthly, there's a right and there's a wrong. Now, you could make this inference from the fact that there's a creator who creates with order, and now we see that. There is a right and there is a wrong. This is part of a Christian worldview. A Christian worldview is not relativistic, that just, well, there's shades of gray. No, there are on certain points black and white. We see that at the cross. Jesus did not have to die if there was no wrong, and if I wasn't in the wrong. So we see that there. And then that cross leads us into sort of the fifth element of a worldview. And again, I'm just picking 5 for the speed of it, but redemption for sin. We're not doomed, and it's not karma. There is a way out. There is a thing called grace. There's forgiveness and redemption. And that's part of the Judeo-Christian worldview in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. So creator creates with order. All humans have dignity. History has a goal. There is a right and wrong. There's redemption for sin. This, I think, can if you and I kind of inculcate this and then use this as our worldview for when we're reading things and seeing things, we can see where folks are deviating from that.
Yeah. It's so unbelievably important to have that.
Yeah.
Like to be able to, like to have those glasses and those lenses, that worldview to be able to put on, because I think at some point it'll give us a glimpse into the reality that God has created and ordained, the one that we're actually living in. Mm-hmm. I feel like
what you're saying is, without it, there's a sense in which you're not living in reality.
Yeah, I think
So you're saying non-Christians are not living in reality.
I think we can often find ourselves trying to create a world that's made more in our image than His. That's more so designed for the things that we want and the way that we want the world to be instead of the way the world actually is.
Yeah.
Like in the 21st century, like I don't think we've ever seen this to this level where, I mean, we can see it on social media. We see it just because it's a broader lens on a deeper problem. But we just see so many people, so many of us trying to make our own worlds and try to live lives that are influenced and that have where there aren't consequences for certain sins when God tells us that there are. When there isn't real flourishing that comes from real obedience, when God tells us that there is. And what I love about a biblical worldview,
and where sin is forgiven,
absolutely,
instead of having to be, dragged around all your life.
And see, even in this situation, like I skip over that, and I need a biblical worldview all the time and reminders of it because I can be so quick to skip to the things that I either know really well or the ones that I like to hear the most.
Yeah.
And I can skip past the ones that
I
often
must be
need
more of
to
a
hear
sinner
the
than
most.
you. Then I'm always thinking of forgiveness. The other reason it's important, Ben, this was so perceptive when we were talking about this earlier, is because we can be in our own bubbles. The other reason it's so important to cultivate a Christian worldview, biblical worldview, is because I'm in danger of being in my own bubble. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think we can create worlds around us that, like I was saying, are just very structured to who we are, and a world that looks like us and that and has the rules that we want to have. Like, and what I was saying is just at some point, the world that God has made, His creation has rules. You talked about that. It has a way in which to live it and where you can live it well. And so much of the Bible is about flourishing because it's obedience to Him, and He wants what's best for you. And so the part that often hurts my heart with non-biblical worldviews is it's promising life and it won't lead there. It's ultimately going to lead to hurt and to pain and to heartache.
Yeah.
But simply seeing the world and doing the hard things oftentimes, sometimes easy things, like forgiveness is much easier than trying to live it out and to push through and do things right. But God invites us into His worldview. And there is freedom, there is peace, and there is mercy and love and so many other things. And I think we just need to break down our bubbles that we've created and live into the worldview that He's made for us and just see it for what it is.
And it's harder to break down the bubbles than it used to be, maybe, because in the past, more of our culture that we lived in had more overlap with a Christian worldview.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean it was a Christian nation, but there was more overlap with how the Bible sees the world. For instance, more of the West believed there is a God. Today, it's not like that, and so we can't even learn elements of a biblical worldview from our culture as readily as we could have before. So that's why we have to do the hard work of cultivating it ourselves. How do you do that, Ben? Because you came to Christ at 19 or 20 in college.
Yeah.
And you came with a strong upbringing and but you had to actually change your worldview on a lot of things, which all of us have to do, even if you grow up in Christianity. How'd you do it?
It was just really the question of like how was it cultivated in me? I think, and this sounds really catchy. We've all heard the kind of the two things, but for me, I found that a lot of worldviews are not just simply taught, but they're caught. Like taught is absolutely a good thing. Like we need to be people who are leading well and teaching well the things that God has given us and who He is and what the reality of the world that we live in. But what I found I've just found this to be true was that yes, taught, but so much also is caught. That the people that I would spend my time with, I would see that they were living life in a different way. They saw the world in a different way. Where others had no hope, they had hope.
Yeah.
Where others saw where the origin was that really would lead to hurtful or harmful things, they had hope there. They had an origin that gave purpose and meaning. And I was so influenced by that. Yes, I was taught what it meant to have a biblical worldview, but I caught it from the people that I just admired and eventually fell in love with because they had hope and energy and life.
And you're making a case for why we need the body why we need house church as
Yep.
folks and being on ministry teams because we're with people who share our worldview and serve with them, why we need as high school students, middle school students to be part of a Christian youth group,
Absolutely.
because they need to be with people who know it. Where else do you cultivate it? I mean, how else did you cultivate a Christian worldview? Not just the people you hung out with, although that was big.
Well, so there was that, and then even probably more importantly was just I spent time in the Word, and I spent time in prayer, and I spent time seeking the Lord. What I found was the more time you ground yourselves in His Word, which is a glimpse, a very wide glimpse, and a very clear glimpse into reality, the more steps you take into the actual reality that God has made for you and has made just in general. And it's easier to remove the blinders that we often put up ourselves of the different worldviews. It's easier to take off those glasses and to put on a deeper one when you've spent time in His Word and you've kind of built up those glasses.
Yep.
It's almost like instead of just putting on those really light prescription glasses, you're putting on binoculars in a way to really see deeply and see further, like far into the reality that God has given you.
That's
and
great.
so I would spend time in His Word, and I wanted to know what He had for me. Because I don't think it's just, as we all know, I mean, we as a body, we know this, that Scripture isn't just our salvation, or Scripture isn't just you pick it up once and you're done because you're good. But every time you spend, like God has something for you there. And then so you can take a deeper step into who He is in His reality. But
And in that sense, just being in Scripture, you're catching the worldview of Scripture. So caught versus taught. Like you could take a worldview course, which is good, but also by just being with the Lord in His Word, He's slowly but surely giving you better glasses.
Absolutely.
Also Christian authors, like in Christian media. So
Yeah.
I'm watching, on Netflix, I'm watching a documentary called American Gospel. And maybe you've seen it, American Gospel, it's worth it. And I'm not really watching it all at once. I'm kind of watching it a few minutes in the evening here and there. And it's fascinating. It's about the prosperity gospel and how like even people are saying, man, like Costi Hinn, Benny Hinn's nephew, he's come out of that into the true gospel. And he's like, I had no idea how wrong I was. But he had the wrong glasses on the whole time.
Yeah.
So anyway, but Christian media as well as Scripture, as well as Christian authors. J.I. Packer died last week. And I mean, the book that changed me more than anything in terms of forming me how to think God's thoughts after Him was Knowing God by J.I. Packer, written before I was born. So good. I mean, it's the discipleship book that could help. Anyway, so Scripture, Christian authors, Christian media, good ones. Not the false authors, though. There's so many, like, if they have a big picture of them on the front cover, probably avoid it. Let me just say that. I won't name any names.
I was going to say.
All right. Okay, let's move on then to us engaging people around us in the world without a Christian worldview. Like, since I have one pair of glasses on and they have another pair of glasses on, maybe they don't even know what theirs are. Maybe I do know that they're different. How do I engage them?
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing because there's just so many complications with dealing with people. And one of the ways that I often try to decipher and just figure all that out is, and this sounds always really bad, figure out what are the hills that I like, or what are the most important things that I want to hold to, and how do I decide where I'm going to be? And one of them is just, I think we need to be people, and I actually mentioned this in the last time I got to preach when we were talking about our words, was being people who stand with truth and wanting to lead with truth.
Yeah.
And that often means taking our time to jump into the conversation. You don't have to be first, and you don't always want to be last, but at some point we need to enter in when we have something to say and we've thought through what we want to say, and we know that it's not necessarily just right, but it's a good, helpful thing to promote the conversation. Because God is a God of truth, and He has that for us.
Do you think it's always going to be accepted?
Absolutely.
Received?
Absolutely. If you say it well enough.
Especially on Facebook.
Everybody loves Facebook.
The
But
comment
absolutely
threads.
not, right?
Yeah.
And so then the question is, when people are, when you have to say something that's a little hard and difficult, how do you say it? I think we often need to be people who lead in truth and in love, right? It's easy to lean to one or the other. In truth, we're just kind of hitting people over with a club of truth, but often if we're just with love, it's just or whispers? And we want to try to walk that line of, I think, of both. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, like how, because you do want to stand for truth, but you don't want to be in the way of someone hearing it.
Hmm.
And depending on how, like, so I'm just thinking on a Facebook thread, comment thread,
Yeah.
or if they ever do this anymore, a conversation around the water cooler at work, with friends, colleagues that don't know the Lord. You want to be able to give truth, but so often, if someone like I don't know how you introduce. Well, it's because you don't have points numbers 2 and 3 of a Christian worldview. Like you don't say that.
Yeah.
But you know that, and so I like how somebody says you kind of maybe say something that is a stone in their shoe that they think about later. Like maybe they don't accept it right then or acknowledge it, but you give them something to think about in a gentle way that just causes them to think a little bit later.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not so sure maybe about abortion. Like I'm just not so sure that those little babies don't feel pain, and just leave it at that. You don't have to sort of win the whole argument right there at the water cooler, but you can just offer that. I don't know. It's not easy though.
It's not, and I think you're right. It's just because I think we need a reminder that truth is heavy. Like it's big. There's a lot to it. I mean, it's got a lot of glory, a lot of weight to it, and I think trying to hold it in a way where it is less of a club and more of a pebble in the shoe that's a good reminder of the reality of it is a helpful way to see that, because we rarely ever anger anyone into the faith.
Yeah, that's good.
And we want to be serious about truth, but we also need to be just as serious about loving people well, and that at some point worldviews are taught and caught. And so we can help teach and help them catch the vision in the way and to catch the worldview by the way that we teach it.
And that's on the broader, when it's down to your neighbor in front of you, your one coworker who's struggling, you can lead with love.
Yeah.
And draw them around to truth as you earn the right to be heard, kind of as you pour into them. Okay, that brings us to the last thing, because I just saw the clock, and I know we're sort of done here. At the end of the day, worldview isn't the deepest part of us.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about a biblical worldview, it's essential, but still there's something deeper than the lenses, and it's the eyes. There's something we want to look at. And Scripture talks about it as our heart or our desires. So even deeper than worldview, we need to be cultivating hearts that are longing for who the Lord is. And that's even more important than just making sure we got all our T's crossed and our I's dotted.
Absolutely. I think you can see the world in a right way and still have a heart that's cold for Him. And we need to be seeing the world rightly, but we need to be seeing Him intimately and seeing Him in a loving and heart-filled way. Just in a way, because if we don't see Him with admiration and love and affection, yes, we may see the world rightly, but we're not seeing the Lord rightly. And so we need both.
And at the end of the day, that's the only proper response to understanding a biblical worldview is sheer devotion and worship.
Absolutely.
Because that is the biblical worldview, is that we're created as worshipers.
Yep.
And that's where we are. Well, Ben, thank you for challenging us, encouraging us, building us up. Thank you for joining us and beginning to think about this. I would challenge you, ask yourself, is my worldview really reflective of God's, of Scripture? Because it's the same thing. And then say, how can I get it more in line? And how can I grow my heart to worship Him more? And watch what God does. Call or email us if you have any questions or want to go deeper. We'd love to help you. We got a bunch of resources if you want to take a little bit of a few more steps. And thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time on The Daily Grace.